So welcome everyone. So honored to have you here for the May edition of the New York Space Business Roundtable. We are going to have an exciting topic today, which is if Taiwan goes, does commercial space go with it? While you are here, you should know that you are on mute. You will not be able to unmute until we get to the audience participation segment at the 1 o'clock mark. But the chat is currently open and you are welcome to use it. If you have any questions that you'd like to post to the panelists, please feel free to use the chat functionality. And of course, if you have any and just wish to talk to one another, please feel free to go ahead and use the chat. And so with that, we shall get ourselves underway. And so I'm going to go ahead and invite Lou to come up and take it away. Thank you, Lou.
Well, thank you, Tamara. Thanks for getting us going. And you can see from the slide what we're going to be talking about today. But if it's the third Wednesday of the month, it must be time to talk about things like that. This is the New York Space Business Roundtable. I'm Lou Zacharilla of Space and Satellite Professionals International, the world's oldest and largest nonprofit trade association for the commercial space industry and its professionals all across the globe, along with Joe Fargnoli of the New York Space Alliance, Tamara Bond-Williams of SSPI, who you just heard, and Matt Owen, who's back with us this week as our line producer. And we're going to try to bring you a conversation about Taiwan's role in our industry. So we think this is a really good conversation, and the people that we have today are people that we've just been wanting to talk to for a long, long time. Before I get going, I just have to shout out some of the people who make it that we can do this, who support us both financially and in other ways. And you can see them there up on your screen. We want to thank the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg, the Luxembourg Trade and Investment Office here in New York for their support, as well as SpaceNews, our media partner, and you'll be hearing from them shortly. Rice Space Institute down in Houston, which is one of the partners of this series, New Space New York, World Teleport Association, and the Washington Space Business Roundtable. We couldn't do it without them, and we really appreciate their support. Okay, and we appreciate it if you would support them as well when you can. In a few moments, we're going to be talking about a relationship that was actually born in conflict, but it seems that conflict is a part of everything that we do today. It has worked itself into the sinews of human culture. In our country here in the United States, where we are today, it reached a supermarket in upstate New York and a church in California, and has been something that has struck us deeply. So actually what I'd like to do before we go further, I want to hand it back to Tamara just to acknowledge the fact that there has been conflict, and so that we don't take it lightly. Tamara, I'm going to hand it back to you for a special segment here.
Thank you so much, Lou. So over the weekend, as Lou was referencing, we witnessed two horrific acts of violence motivated by hate. The racial hatred in Buffalo took the lives of 10 people, while political hatred took the life of one person in California. That last act, the murder of Dr. John Cheng, is particularly poignant to us today as we explore issues related to China and Taiwan. I feel it should be said, it should go without saying, that people can reasonably have differing political opinions without resorting to violence. It has been our tradition here at the New York Space Business Roundtable to start each meeting with a lead-off video. Today, in memory of those we lost over the weekend, I'm asking everyone to turn off their cameras and mute their mics for a brief moment of silence before our introductory video.
Well, thank you, Tamara. Thank you for that. And thanks to SSPI for that video, which is part of our Better Satellite World campaign. And you can learn more about that by visiting bettersatelliteworld.com. We are producing an entire series of videos about the role that satellites play, the positive role that we play in human society. We always ask a big question throughout this event. And of course, this is the big question that we want you to think about. As you listen to our four guests today, ask yourself the question and begin to answer it. What would be your strategy for ensuring that Taiwan does not, quote, go under? How do we possibly resolve the conflict that we'll be talking about today? So that's really what we want you to think about. And obviously, we've got people who are going to help us think that through. As we do at the beginning of each roundtable, I'm going to turn it over to SpaceNews journalist and my friend Jason Rainbow. Jason is the senior staff writer at SpaceNews, and he will give us today's significant digits report on our topic. Jason, over to you.
Thank you, Lou. Yes, very important and timely topic you're discussing today. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion. We've seen a lot of moves in Taiwan recently to carve out a bigger place in the global space industry. That, of course, is something many countries are doing as costs fall and more performance can be packed into smaller and smaller satellites. But as I'm sure you'll get into later, Taiwan's aspirations here are built on a very strong high-tech foundation, particularly for things like semiconductors, where Taiwanese companies like MediaTek are playing a leading role. Taiwan's space ambitions, though, really kicked into another gear about this time last year, when their Space Development Act was implemented. This law lays out the legal groundwork for Taiwan's space development, including how it relates to international conventions and related regulations about the environment and so on. But it also seeks to nurture talent in the industry. And then in August, Taiwan's National Space Organization, or NPSO, which is a state-run space technology developer, got a new leader in Wu Zhongxin. He actually earned his doctor's degree in aerospace engineering from the University of Michigan. And according to Taiwanese reports, he is affectionately nicknamed Uncle Rocket. So anyway, one of the first things he did was restructure the NPSO to focus on the development of satellite payloads, components, and avionics. And one of his primary tasks is to develop Taiwan's own low Earth orbit satellites, which is a big strategic priority for Taiwan's government. Indeed, in September, Taiwan's president talked about the strategic importance to secure a niche position in the space industry supply chain, as tens of thousands of LEO satellites are due to be launched in the next decade. Taiwan has committed about $830 million to develop its space program between 2019 and 2028. And I think the next satellite they're due to launch will be the Triton weather satellite. That will be a big milestone for Taiwan because the project has suffered a lot of delays caused by the pandemic and supply chain issues that are being felt across the industry. But more than 85% of that satellite's components were developed in Taiwan. And according to reports, this includes its navigation system, onboard computer, and power control units that were developed in collaboration with local academic and industrial partners. So this really underlines how sophisticated the industrial base already is for growing the space industry internationally. Europe's Arianespace was chosen to launch Triton, and according to the latest update, that was scheduled for this year, but I don't have anything more specific than that. Taiwan doesn't have a domestic launch capability, but there's a Taiwanese startup called TaiSpace, which, as far as I'm aware, is the first and only commercial rocket company in Taiwan, which is looking to develop an orbital launcher for small satellites. But their plans have suffered some setbacks. They were originally planning to launch prototypes from Taiwan, but following some legal issues about the location, they moved it to a site in Australia, only for the prototype to catch fire during a launch attempt in October. So plenty going on, and I think especially with the way geopolitics are moving, there's never been a better time to develop space resources. It's not just an economic play. And I think we're seeing in Ukraine just how important various space capabilities are for protecting strategic interests. So that's what I have for you this month.
Jason, thanks a lot. That's great. You know, before I introduce my colleague, Joe Fargnoli, I want to ask you, again, this is more of an opinion than a fact. You've just given us a lot of facts. How integrated at this point do you envision Taiwan being in our global commercial space family?
I think, like I said earlier, it's their space industry, or plans to grow the space industry, is coming from a really strong foundation. We've all heard about the semiconductor shortages that are wreaking havoc across the industry, and you know, if Taiwan can really step up and help out with some of the high-tech supply shortages that the industry is seeing, I think it definitely has an increasing role to play in the international community. Absolutely.
Yeah, great. And of course, we've got two colleagues here from Taiwan who can speak more to that issue. But before we do that, thanks again, Jason, and thanks SpaceNews for being a part of this. Somebody we always want to hear from, my colleague and fellow upstate New Yorker, Rochesterian, Joseph Fargnoli. Joe, we're off to a good start here today. Welcome.
Agreed, Lou. I think we've got a great topic today. I want to introduce our speakers and just say we have three very esteemed guests today to help us through this conversation. Our objective is to look at every side of the question of the impact of the future of Taiwan on the commercial space industry. So we're not here for a political discussion. We're here to talk about the future of the space industry, given our longstanding relationship with the industrial base in Taiwan, and how potential the future of the country may affect the commercial space industry. So with that, let me introduce the three speakers that we have today. These each have been very carefully selected, and they're all very knowledgeable on this topic. I want to start with Dr. Darius Sankey. He is a general partner with a group called Innovation Acceleration Capital, which is a technology investment firm that provides strategic advice and management support to corporations that are facing the need to develop outsourced R&D strategies. Dr. Sankey is the former president of Ocean Tomo China Technology. He served as a senior director of portfolio management and intellectual ventures, overseeing investments and developing licensing programs for the $5 billion Invention Investment Funds 1 and 2. He was also general partner at Zone Ventures with Tim Draper, and he worked as a management consultant at McKinsey & Company. He has also held strategic planning, consulting, and R&D positions at RAND, AT&T, Bell Labs, and he holds his BS in physics and BS in electrical engineering from MIT and PhD from none other than the University of Rochester. And I think in Darius's role with Ocean Tomo, he spent 2 years living in China. So he's at the right point to really effectively discuss this. And with his work with IAC and Innovation Acceleration Capital. There's a great deal he's going to contribute about IP. I also want to introduce Dr. Liang. Dr. Liang received his PhD from TU Dresden, Germany in 2008, where he contributed to the MIMO OFDM physical layer research. From 95 to 2001, he was with Taiwan Cellular Corporation. He was responsible for the 2G cellular network implementation and business projects. From 03 to 16, he led an R&D group related to the physical layer at Vodafone. He was responsible for the dedicated short-range communication, 4G, 5G vehicle to everything, communication systems, and autonomous drive-related R&D projects in the ITRI. And since 2020, he has joined the National Low Earth Orbit Satellite Communications Development Project, involving both National Space Program Office and ITRI. He is currently the Chief Engineer of Communication Systems, including Space Segment, Communication Payload, and Ground Segment. I lastly want to introduce Dr. Robert Spalding. General Robert Spalding. General Spalding is the CEO of Semper, which is a standalone 5G service and software platform designed to power the automated world. Semper is defense-grade hardened and built for data security. He has served in senior positions within the Defense and State Department for more than 28 years, retiring as a brigadier general. He was the chief architect for the current national security strategy and senior director for strategy to the president of the National Security Council. Robert's innovation while serving in the White House has led to a reset in national security and public policy regarding telecommunications in the US as well as globally. General Spalding is a former B-2 stealth bomber pilot. He is a former China strategist for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Joint Staff at the Pentagon, as well as having served as the senior defense official and defense attaché in Beijing. General Spalding has written extensively on national security matters. His book, Stealth War: How China Took Over While America's Elite Slept, is an executive summary of his almost decade-long work countering Chinese Communist Party influence. General Spalding is an Olmsted Scholar and a life member of the Council on Foreign Relations, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. With that, I also want to mention Dr. Spalding's second book, which is called War Without Rules. And again, the nature of our conversation today is to talk about the reality of technology development of space activities within Taiwan. Dr. Liang can cover that. The nature and potential of commercial engagement with the Chinese economy, and we think Darius has a great background there, and some of the cautions and concerns that General Spalding will represent. And as we get started—
Hey, Joe, excuse me,
Yes.
Joe.
Yes.
We've got a special guest on this panel as well. We have entrepreneur and CEO of Tensor Tech, Thomas Yan.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you for that, Lou. So with that, I want to sort of get into some kickoff questions here and just point out Dr. Spalding's second book is called War Without Rules. And I want to start the conversation just reading a first paragraph from the cover. General Spalding says, for the last 50 years, American leaders have fundamentally misunderstood China, which has no interest in the status quo. It is not cooperating with the West, even when it pretends to. Instead, it wants, through deception and stealth, to acquire total control over the globe. And inch by inch, we're letting them outmaneuver us. While we are preparing for overt military attack, we don't realize that the CCP views all party members as part of their army. We expect China to cooperate with us even as they exploit our drug crisis and a pandemic. We imagine that our opponent in this war is limited to the Chinese government, not realizing that the CCP uses Chinese businesses and even individuals to steal intellectual property, control communication networks, and disrupt financial markets. In short, China has bamboozled us into thinking we're playing by the same rules when we aren't even playing the same game. Hate to deliver that harsh message, but that is one element of reality here we want to discuss. So to transition here, I want to kind of just point out that we're dealing with very long cultural and socioeconomic issues here between China and Taiwan. The amount of trade that occurs between China and Taiwan is significant, as Jason alluded to. China is Taiwan's largest trading partner, accounting for 26.3% of the total trade and 22% of Taiwan's imports in 2020. It almost seems at times that this fact alone would keep the two ongoing with economic activity peacefully. So I think the question I want to kick off with, and maybe I'll open this up to any of our panelists who want to take it on, is how do politics override trade in China? There seems to be a prosperous, mutually beneficial economic relationship going. We want to see that continue. We want to see that support the US space economy. How do we keep politics from interfering with that? How do we all just get along and create a prosperous, peaceful future? I'll leave that to anyone who wants to pick that up.
You know what? Why don't we start, Joe, with General Spalding on that, because he's written about that. He may suggest to us that it's not possible, but I'm not putting words in its mouth.
Thanks, Lou, and thanks, Joe. I think that's the bottom line is, and I think we've seen this already with what China has been willing to do in terms of undermining its own tech companies in the market. They are, under Xi Jinping, really locking down much more the business community than they ever have before, and it's going to increase. And my view is Xi Jinping has said that he is not going to leave Taiwan to the next generation. And what that means, given the fact that he's probably going to, continue for at least another 10 years leadership of China, and his vision is to bring Taiwan back into the fold. I think, what we have to recognize is that China has an interest to reunify the mainland with Taiwan, and they will do so using any means necessary. They have so far not used force, but they have now built on their side of the strait the means to do so. And so, when I look at China today and the moves that they've made in terms of locking down their economy and restricting trade, that would seem to be out of character for what they've done and really not make a lot of sense. You don't destroy hundreds of billions of dollars in economic value. What I saw from the very beginning trade deal with the Trump administration was when Liu He took that back to Xi Jinping, they went to Zhongnanhai, they tore it up. And from that point on, I think they have been preparing to decouple themselves from the United States. Just the other day, they announced 3 universities, major universities in China, that are no longer going to subject themselves to international scrutiny in terms of standards. So this decoupling has been ongoing since 2017, and it's accelerating.
Thanks, General. Joe, let's go to Taiwan then and hear from our colleagues there, because if I was listening to that and he was talking about Canada doing that to the United States, as a businessman, I would certainly have concern, but as a citizen, I would have probably even larger concerns. Thomas, I'm going to turn it over to you. I mean, you have committed your life to your business, Tensor Tech, which you can tell us about. Obviously, you're in Taiwan, you love your country. When you hear someone with General Spalding's qualifications say that China is not going to trust Taiwan to the next generation, 2 questions. First of all, what's your sense? But secondly, tell us a little bit about the ecosystem in Taiwan that is flourishing, and how in many ways that may be a buttress or a tool for some kind of conciliation.
Sure, thanks for asking. So let me briefly introduce you to all of you about myself. I'm Thomas Yan, the CEO of Tensor Tech, and then we are a satellite attitude determination and control system manufacturer and a designer from Taiwan. And so our company basically grow and then founded in Taiwan, of course. And in fact, how our company started is by participating in some research project funded by National Space Organization in my country. And then so we started with some local projects in Taiwan, and then we gradually go global to service international customers. And so in my point of view, and I believe most of the Taiwanese like me, that's actually we have heard the threats from China since we were little, and then we grew up, but still nothing happened actually. So now we are more, at least myself, we don't think that China will really really send army to try to bring Taiwan back to their territory, at least in the short term. And but in fact, that when talk about the space business, right now I think most of the Taiwanese companies, they didn't supply the components or subsystem to China, because China itself there are some restrictions on purchasing foreign space components, especially most of their space activities are funded by their governments. So at least for TensorTech and then most of the space company in Taiwan that I know, that we haven't have a business cooperation with China's company or the government facilities yet. And so that's basically my point of view about the China's relationship to Taiwan's space industry.
Just so so we know, Thomas, who is your primary market? Is it inside Taiwan? Is it Southeast Asian companies, or are you selling globally at this point?
Yeah, right now half of our sales is in Taiwan, and in Taiwan mostly we support the governmental projects, and then there are Europe and then also US customer also.
Very good. Joe, I'm going to go over to TJ Liang, Dr. Liang. You're, of course, with ITRI. I know what ITRI is, but our audience may not know. So I'm going to ask you to explain a little bit what ITRI is, and then talk a little bit about your work in long-range communications and how it is impacting the growth of the industry in Taiwan and now under the Space Development Act that Jason spoke about.
Okay, yes. Maybe I introduce a bit about our government-supported space project. So basically, as Jason said, NSPU has a new leader, Dr. Zhongxin Wu. Actually, our project is led by our Ministry of Science, and the minister of this department founded and coordinate all the space projects inside of Taiwan. We have some project used to be a LEO project, but with the payload of, for example, the camera. Camera is used for the climate research and know, for example, the status of typhoon and so on. That is our major purpose before 2018. But after 2018, we have a new project. Since Taiwan is especially the main provider of the telecommunication system, like the 4G, 5G equipment, but basically a ground system. Now we have the other sorts. We like to develop the communication system from the 3GPP product line, from the 5G to currently beyond 5G. We all know that in the 3GPP, we have the NTN, non-terrestrial network standardization. We have some companies and research groups join this, and we all know that part of the standardization in the 6G must have the LEO communication system. Okay, so for this potential business, our government invests the development of such kind of system. For example, you have just introduced my background. I used to work on the 4G, 5G operator and also Vodafone. My PhD tutor, Gerhard Weiss, is also IEEE 5G chair. We have done a lot of such things also with the UK University of Surrey and also 5G Lab Germany about the communication system. We want to extend them to the satellite part. And personally, I have also found 2 startups in Europe. One of them are satellite communication system companies. Now I sold to Roden Schwartz. Basically, we want to cooperate all the potential partners to have our technology on the communication, but civil application. I have to emphasize that our purpose is for civil application. For this one, it's a supplement of the 6G ground system. For this kind of development, many of our ICT companies and industries in Hsinchu and also in, basically in Taiwan, they have a lot of interest on that, mainly currently on ground equipment. For example, the handset and user terminal and, for example, the gateway equipment, something like that. But currently, we also would like to push to upgrade our technologies. For example, currently we are developing our communication payload. Basically, what we can do is similar spec as Starlink. So that means we would like to incubate our companies here to have the technology to cooperate with Starlink or OneWeb, for example. This is one purpose, as I just emphasized, the civil application. And from this kind of system to subsystem to unit and chipset, we also would like to define which components or parts are the key components in the industry. For example, later, if we want to reduce the power consumption, we like to reduce the cost. Which one is the most important critical one? And we focus on development on such kind of things.
Good.
Okay, that's our purpose here.
Thank you, TJ. Thanks for explaining that to us as well. Joe, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Do you have a question for Darius?
Yeah, sure, Darius. So you're currently a general partner with Innovation Acceleration Capital. You spent 2 years in China working Ocean Tomo. That provides a pretty unique perspective. We're trying to look here at the commercial space industry in the US and how we're trying to focus on that element of this. What is your perspective on the status and future of Taiwan in supplying the US commercial space industry? You're on mute, Darius.
The host needs to unmute me.
You're good now.
We can hear you, Darius.
Okay, good. So can you repeat that, Joe? Because I was trying to unmute myself just quickly.
Sure. I was just acknowledging that, you spent 2 years working technology in China with Ocean Tomo on a commercial level. Very good basic understanding of the IP community there. With Innovation Acceleration Capital, you're working across global opportunities and some activities in and through China. And I know that, we've looked at activities involving how to support the commercial space industry, especially through photovoltaics and other key semiconductor technologies. And one of the key questions is, what is your perspective on the future of Taiwan as a supply chain contributor to the U.S. commercial and government space industry?
Yeah, so I think we have to sort of think about the history of Taiwan and where China is going. While I was in China, they have been making significant investments in new technology development, in all areas of space and communications. And because as a result of that, and the capital they've been spending to increase the number of patents they have and to become more of a leader leading this initiative. I mean, I don't know if people know, but Huawei leads the 5G initiative now, not Qualcomm. So they're starting to take a leadership role in that, and they're starting to export their technologies around the world. This has now put Taiwan in a unique position in that their outsourcing capability in semiconductors and development of technologies that support space become more limited because China is now able to do that on their own. And so I think this perspective that, China will take over Taiwan and drive that is not exactly correct because they don't need Taiwan anymore. So, the movement of TSMC to the United States and the movement of Taiwanese who I think wanted to continue to have a position is going to require Taiwan to export and build factories and technologies outside of Taiwan. And I think this movement towards the United States is a movement of realizing that there's a compatibility need between the US and Taiwan. And I think Taiwan will take an advantage of the fact that we need to rebuild our own manufacturing in the United States to support space and other technologies. And that we'll see that movement while China will focus on China to do it. So this idea that there's going to be a conflict between Taiwan and China is going to more likely hurt Taiwan in a sense that they can't support the manufacturing that's going to be necessary for all of this. And the United States is going to have to build it in the United States. And we can learn from the Taiwanese and they can help us do that while the Chinese are building their capabilities in China.
Oh, very good, Darius. As you're speaking, I'm looking at General Spaulding, and I'm thinking about his book. General, it seems to me your call to action in stealth wars is that politics is war, and that China has sort of connected the world by exporting their brand of warfare, which isn't military, as Darius was suggesting. Now, I know you have a degree in economics, so you may lean a little bit to the economic side, but tell us what you mean when you say that, and whether you agree with what you've heard so far.
Well, the one comeback that I would have for this belief that China will not invade is, I was talking to retired general officers up until like even 2 weeks prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the common belief was that Russia would not invade. And what I said was Russia is absolutely going to invade because this is what Putin has been telegraphing. She has been telegraphing as well. And so I think one of the things that we like to do is we like to essentially hear or only hear the parts of the message that we want to hear. And I think that's certainly true with regard to Russia. I think it's also true with regard to China. In terms of the economic aspects of this, I mean, quite plainly, politics in the United States is influenced by the corporate and financial sector. And to the extent that the Chinese Communist Party has, used business as a way to create relationships, monetary relationships with the corporate and financial sector, they influence our own political process through those relationships. I got to see this firsthand working in the White House when we had Silicon Valley chip companies lobbying on behalf of Huawei, and I think this happens in Taiwan through the business community and relationships. I think it happens in every democracy around the world, and I think that's the powerful capability of the doctrine of warfare that was laid out in unrestricted warfare. It wasn't a strategy, it wasn't a plan. It was just a recognition of what worked and how the principles to take advantage of them, which are principles that have worked, throughout the history of mankind. Graft, economic relationships, just flat out, aligning interests are very powerful in order to get the things that you want. And that's how the Chinese Communist Party operates.
I just want to follow up on that, Joe, before we go back to Taiwan. You also talk about the ability of the Chinese, or the willingness of the Chinese to do that economic assault by devaluing companies as a means of sabotage, if I'm reading you correctly. How would this apply to the satellite communications infrastructure, both here in the United States, in the West, and the one that the TJ and Thomas are working in? Is there a threat there? Because, as you say, the 7 deadly sins work everywhere, so far as I can tell.
Absolutely. I've commented on this before. I think that the relationship between Tesla and SpaceX, given the fact that Tesla's market share and capitalization have a lot to do with its business in China, makes SpaceX, a potential vulnerability. Makes Tesla a potential vulnerability for SpaceX. The same can be said for Amazon and Kuiper and any other commercial space company today that's operating in a global marketplace. I think the way that the Chinese Communist Party operate is to leverage these connections. I did it using airplanes and 2,000-pound bombs. They use it using their economic and financial relationships. It's a way to create an outcome that gets things that you want by influencing those that you have relationships with.
Joe?
I guess I want to go back to Darius and Darius, relative to your pragmatic on the ground experience, looking forward, if you were to offer advice to the U.S. commercial space community on how to bank on great entrepreneurs like Thomas in terms of being able to deliver to the U.S. space economy and to avoid some of the pitfalls or liabilities that I think General Spalding is referring to, what advice would you give? What posture would you suggest taking? You're on mute again, Darius.
Unmute, Darius. Here you go.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess you're asking for my counter point of view to what Gerald Spalding just said.
Politely.
And what I would propose. I think we're forgetting about a couple of human capital elements here. One must realize that China just went through a whole generation or more of one child. Okay, so they have a generation of people where there's no women, and so this is a problem. So how I don't think China can afford to go to war. I mean, I think Russia couldn't afford to go to war. Russia went to war because their economy is failing. China is linked to our economy. Going to war is a last resort for them. They're trying to move 500 million people from the rural areas to a modern civilization. The reason why they're now investing in Africa and South America is to expand their ability to manufacture just the way we do in China for their growing rich middle class. This rich middle class has way more influence than we think, and we shouldn't hedge that. Those students that are there building new companies and working and studied in the United States and went back to China because they're getting a lot of capital to do that, have grown up in our society. They're going to come of age, and our influence is going to be with them. I really do believe that we've educated the Chinese scientists to build what the Chinese are enforcing, and it's up to the scientist community and the entrepreneur community that studied here, went back to China, and is in Taiwan to influence change. This ageist group that created the CCP are dying, and the new regime and their kids who are taking over the provinces and ruling those companies in the country are going to have a different opinion. And I think that we should leverage that culture exchange that we have with them to come up with a common ground of how we're going to leverage and reduce our exceeding resources and make it possible for people to live with a limited number of resources we have on the planet. And space is going to be a part of that. I mean, in reality, we're wasting energy in this country, and they don't have enough. So the war is over resources of energy. And if we can figure out how to balance that out in a way with technology and influencing that so that there doesn't have to be a war over resources, then I think we have a chance.
Thanks, Darius. Thomas, I'm going to turn it over to you to respond to what you heard from your two colleagues in the United States. And just as a fact, I was looking at some data that Taiwan actually has a larger military reserve force than China. I don't know if that's because of the one-child policy or just because of the nature of conscription in those two countries. Maybe General Spalding would know more about that. But Thomas, and this is TJ, I'll go to TJ after. We've always thought that Taiwan could be the tail that wags the dog for the relationship with China and Southeast Asia, because you guys are so innovative there. And a lot of the things that you're doing, I mean, for a nation of 23 million, you punch way above your weight. So you've kind of gotten there already in terms of development. Is that, for a company like yours, is that realistic to think that the industry commercial space industry, for example, might be the tail that wags the dog, and therefore allows the kind of sort of happy ending that Darius is talking about?
Yeah, so I think the situation for Taiwanese commercial space industry is quite similar to Taiwan's status in the IT industry supply chain. Like in the IT industry supply chain, that would build chips, that would design the chips. But you seldom heard that there are Taiwanese companies that are capable of building a system or a brand, like in the past, there are HTC who built the smartphones,
right.
but they are no longer that popular as it was. And so Taiwanese are always good at building components or some infrastructure in the fundamental level, but we are less capable of building system. And that's when talking about system, it's quite similar to like in space industry. That's in fact there are many Taiwanese companies building capable components, but they are less. There are no Taiwanese companies that own a satellite and providing international service. And then for when talking about commercial industry, especially space industry, that there's a limitation there because like for a Taiwanese company, it's very difficult to do the frequency allocation to reserve a communication band for their own satellite. Because when we are doing so, then there will be political pressures there because we will have to use the name of China and to apply for that communication band, and then it's not possible to do so right now. So I think that's also another reason why most of the Taiwanese commercial companies, space companies, are focusing more on the components or the subsystem level. But you never heard a Taiwanese company are building a space system.
Yeah, that's right. And we forget that not having that political recognition by most of the countries in the world or in some of the organizations does prohibit you when it comes to that. And yet, TJ, Dr. Liang, there's a Leo constellation planned. What is the plan for orbiting vehicles and space? Because obviously space is going to be both an economic battlefront and a digital battlefront, and also a military one. What is the plan for the Leo constellations? How is Taiwan envisioning that?
Okay, I try to tell you what I am authorized to say. Okay. The first one,
come on.
Okay, the first one is I just say that the main purpose for us is for civil application. That's 100% true.
Mm-hmm.
Since for such kind of thing, we try to combine the experience from the GSM system. If you see the history from, for example, Qualcomm used to have their own OFDM system, but they failed because they want to rule all the spec and standard to cooperate with the other operator. But when you see the concept of roaming in Europe, they just combine many different small and medium-sized countries to build the system together. I think for the space constellation system, the operation part is really very hard. But I think the only possibility is we don't build or construct a whole globally covered rail system. It's not possible from financially or from service providing. It's really not possible for Taiwan our own. So basically what we are thinking is, for example, we cover only the altitude covering Taiwan from the north 20 to 35, for example, for our own purpose. And then we would like and very happy to cooperate with the other countries. For example, Japan, from Europe, from Southeast East Asia, they cover different altitudes, and we let it be able to roaming or hand over inside all our systems to build the joint ecosystem. I think that's our concept to do it. Yes, this is one from the operation, and I think from my point of view, the operating or operator system is the locomotive for the whole communication industry. Like I used to work together with Vodafone and T-Mobile. We see that their requirement will highly impact the supply chain from, for example, Ericsson, Siemens, Nokia, and so on, and also Huawei. Yes, so I think we should do it from the locomotive as a start to cooperate with all the countries together and also work with the industry leads together. That's what I would like to deliver.
Yep.
Yes.
Cooperating with all the democracies as you've done, for 70 years. Thank you for that answer. We're running low on time. General Spalding, there's one question I really was dying to ask you on this. Of course, the USA recently declared that Taiwan is not part of China. That was kind of a point of departure from strategic ambiguity, it seemed to me. But I was noticing in one of your interviews, you had a picture of Pope John Paul II behind you, Pope St. Paul John II now. And I was thinking to ask you, when it came to the Soviet Union's collapse, that particular moral force, that particular cultural earthquake was sort of interjected into the bloodstream of the communist system there. And over time, its rot began to become more prominent, and we know the results of that. Do you envision something similar in Asia where the conditions are much different? You don't have the Pope who can influence, certainly not China, because they put bishops in jail, so far as I were told. But do you see some kind of moral element to this as well, where Taiwan, being a democracy, being a free nation, pushes its collaborators and its countries to some kind of resolution and balance here?
So you alluded a little bit earlier in the conversation to the fact that China is really focused on the economic, and they watched what happened to the Soviet Union. They understood that the Soviet Union far outspent for guns over butter, and they are determined not to make that mistake. So what really made, John Paul II, and in particular, an agency that no longer exists, a U.S. information agency, which was really infused with a lot of money under the Reagan administration, Voice of America, Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe. So this kind of undermining of the fabric of the former Soviet states, just by transmitting the truth, was brought home to the Soviet people because of the fact that they were starving, that they didn't have things in their grocery stores. If you go to China, the grocery stores are full. The people have jobs, and that's what the Chinese Communist Party has created, is a social contract that says you give up political freedom, you give up the right to free speech, freedom of religion, but in turn, we give you economic prosperity. We ensure that you have a job. We ensure that you can buy a home. We ensure that you can send your kids to school. So by and large, the Chinese people aren't interested in going around essentially the propaganda, the Great Firewall, and all of the messaging and narrative control that the Chinese Communist Party uses to influence its population. Now bringing in 5G and the ability to monitor everybody and then slowly interject the kind of messages they want them to believe. I think that's a far more powerful model than we had during the Cold War. The problem is not that we are able to influence the Chinese population. The problem is that the Chinese Communist Party is now able to influence our population. And in fact, we see our politicians and our citizens more and more believing that the system that China has created is much better for human society. And in fact, we should change our social, political, and economic systems to mirror that of China. In fact, Justin Trudeau just said that, recently, and this was used in particular during the coronavirus to demonstrate the power of the Chinese social and political system. So, I think, the problem that we have is not that, the China is going to collapse or the younger Chinese are going to, overthrow communism. Quite the opposite. they're very happy with the system, and they're not willing to overthrow it because the economic growth continues. And why does the economic growth continues? Because of this parasitic relationship that China has been able to essentially create. They have a closed financial system, non-convertible currency, strict capital controls, yet they are a part of the IMF basket of currencies. So they're part of the World Bank. It is something to say that the number 2 economy in the world has infiltrated so incredibly into the institutions, the economic, the corporate, the financial institutions of the world, and not have to abide by any of the rules thereof. So in essence, I think we have a challenge here, and we have a challenge that is unprecedented, certainly since the end of World War II, but really it's not a threat to America, it's a threat to democracy writ large.
Right, and potentially a threat to commercial space, but it's a much larger issue that you raise. Darius, I can't let that go without getting you in on this to close us out, and then we're going to go to questions. First of all, it sounds what the general described sounds like something. Well, it might not be a bad thing given all the conditions you set out earlier, but to some it may sound like a Faustian bargain among 1.4 billion souls. What say you to close this session?
I don't disagree with what Robert Spalding is saying. I think he is, but he's painting an outcome of that is extremely negative for the United States. I think one thing to realize about China, it's a 5,000 year history. I actually studied Chinese history, and it's kind of the only empire that has not changed in thousands of years. And the families that I know there, and who are actual people that I knew that lived in Hong Kong when I went there in '97 and had properties in China, these are very old families. The way you need to think about China, it's a feudalist state. It's sort of like you have a king and you have all these provinces, and the nobility owns all the companies, and they have a contract to take care of all the people from jobs. They own all of the factories, they own all the schools, they own all the hospitals. So he's correct. It's a controlled economy because it's a contract that they gave back all of their wealth to a government, and they share it with this idea that nobody starves to death, everyone has a job. So he's correct. And then there's a growing middle class. So then they realize to expand and control their economy, they have to start exporting products. This exportation of products is a new thing for China, and we're seeing their products just like we saw Sony take over the consumer electronics areas with Japan, and now we see Samsung doing it. Now you're going to see Chinese cars, you're going to see, they need us to buy their products in order to have prosperity. So this may not be a bad thing. I think what we're missing in the United States is that in China, as he said, the corporations, the government is all the same thing. In our country, the corporations are driven simply by profit. I think the response, to be honest, is we need better control of our corporations, not handing technology to China. Why is Apple building all the iPhone in the United States, in China? Why is everything outsourced there? Why don't we rebuild our own manufacturing, build our own capabilities here, and lessen transferring capabilities to China? Our response should be, don't let the bottom line of profit drive decisions. If we understood that the social rate of return of our human capital was continuing to build technology here and lead it, we would be in a much better position to fight them because we wouldn't have handed the technology to them. China didn't steal anything that we didn't hand to them. So the response should be looking more balanced on where do we develop our technology, how do we support Taiwan in maintaining a relationship with us through sharing technology back to the United States is our way to win this game. But if we keep outsourcing because we want to lower the cost of labor in the United States, then we're just handing them the capabilities that we're giving them. So, the response here is that we don't have good control over our rich corporate sponsors in the United States who are making decisions freely about manufacturing.
So those are the,
I've got to say that if we have
those are the elite who are asleep. But go ahead, Joe. I'm going to go to Thomas and then I'm going to close.
Yeah, if we have General Spalding and Darius on some level of agreement with General Spalding giving the thumbs up, I think it's probably a wrap for the day.
I saw that, yeah. And Tamara's going to kill me because we're a minute or two over. But Thomas, just very quickly, in a half a minute, as the entrepreneur in the group, you actually are the only guy, I think, who dropped out of school, and you're doing better than all of us. So it tells you about the modern economy. Does what you heard today give you optimism about the future of Taiwan as part of the commercial space industry and the global macro system, so to speak? And real quickly.
I'm confident about being Taiwanese space company being a strong supplier for space components. And we already did do lots of things like this. But the challenge is that the quantity of space industry will never be more than the consumer industry. I mean the quantity, in terms of quantity. So when the Taiwanese companies are always building the space components, then the profit in the market is always quite small compared to you are doing the consumer industry. So I think the challenge is that can Taiwanese company to start to build space system, and then or even being a satellite operator or provide space-based services. I think there's a challenges in the future, but I believe we, and also I'm optimistic about that we have a good foundation. But but we are also trying to learn and then to go one step further. That's my point of view.
Yeah, thank you. Gentlemen, thank you so much. We could speak for another hour, but I really appreciate you making the time for us here, and our friends in Taiwan for staying up late. You can go to sleep now. We do appreciate this. Joe, thank you as well. We're running over, but I wanted to turn this over to Tamara after I do a little bit of what's coming next. But again, guys, thanks a lot for this, and stick around because we'll have some questions for you. Joe, next month, we're going to come to New York State. Our next roundtable is the state of space in a New York state of mind. And we're going to ask the question, which you always ask, why isn't New York a more significant player in commercial space? Or is it? So next month, we'll have Will Porteous of private equity firm RRE Ventures. He'll join some economic development agency leaders from the state and cities of New York to discuss New York money and, of course, why the Yankees will beat the Mets in the World Series this year. Sorry about that, Matt. That's June 16th. So we hope you will register for that. We will also have on for SSPI, women who are involved with us, the SSPI WISE group meeting on Wednesday, May 25th. And we thank Hughes for their support of SSPI WISE. And we talked a little bit about supply chains today, and we're doing a whole series on supply chains as they relate to the entire satellite industry. Every Monday, you can tune in to the Better Satellite World podcast or wherever you get your podcasts and listen to that discussion. This conversation we've had today will be one of those podcasts coming up in the next couple of weeks, and we'll give you a heads up as to when. And finally, before I turn it back over to Tamara, we asked the big question: what would be your strategy for ensuring that Taiwan does not go under? I think we heard some terrific ideas today, but we want to know what you think. So with that, Tamara, I'm going to turn it back over to you. And again, many thanks.
Well, I'm not going to take up too much time. We are at the point of having the big question. You just saw it. What would be your strategy for ensuring that Taiwan does not go under? That's the question, or any other questions that you may have. You are now permitted. We have updated your permission so that you can mute and unmute as you need to, so that if you have any questions, you will be able to ask them. We ask that you raise your hands. That's in the reaction section of the Zoom, where you can smile, give us hearts, but there's also the option to raise your hand like I've just now done, so that we'll know to call on you, and you can direct your questions to anyone on the panel or answer the big question. And so with that, the floor is open.
Tamara, do we have any hands up?
Not yet, but I actually had a question. So, and maybe I shouldn't go maybe I shouldn't stir the pot because we came to a place of agreement, but I was listening to Darius talk a little bit about the changing dispositions of the generations. And I was comparing that somewhat with what General Spalding was talking about. And I just wondered if there was, if that might be the fear from the so-called old guard in China, why they might want to move swiftly to make adjustments, because the next generation has a different disposition. So I put that out there to everybody.
I will comment on that just briefly. One thing I noticed was that the very wealthy in China have one child in China, and they send their second child, because they do have second children, to the United States. They travel to the United States for vacation. And it's interesting to me because it feels like they view the United States as a place where they can have this freedom to be whoever they want to be and not at home, where they have to sort of play this role. And they have this dichotomy as if they are hedging. So I don't think the Chinese have fully decided what to do. I think the world that General Spalding is proposing could happen. I think the United States has more control over what decision they make than we put ourselves in. We are not an aggressor, but what if we were? I mean, what if we decided to annex all of South America and keep them from outsourcing there and make it part of the United States? I sometimes wonder why the United States hasn't been an expansionist, imperialistic empire. Why are we letting China do that? Why are we letting China influence these other countries? And I think that, how the next generation thinks about this, if China believes they can expand their empire by controlling the resources that the IMF and the World Bank have been controlling over these years, but not building societies in those countries effectively, and letting them sort of not really have the true democracies that they should have, then maybe we're the reason why this is a problem. The United States might have to change its perspective and have have a more perspective of building societies in these countries where we take resources. Because I think the Chinese they'll go over there, they'll build the resources, they'll put those people to work, and they'll make them Chinese and put them under their economy and their government. So the war we're having is a political one. We believe that somehow nations should have freedom of choice, and yet when we go there and we take their resources, we don't really give them the freedom of choice. So we need to step up and play a more active role in how we influence these other territories that are about to be where the war is going to happen. The war is going to happen in the third world. It's not going to happen between Taiwan and China. That's my
interesting
perspective.
I'll let the panelists pick up on that, but it's Darius, it reminds me of something I was reading, that the most successful export that the United States had after World War II was Louis Armstrong, who was a jazz musician, one of the greatest, in my view, greatest jazz musician. But the American cultural influence, our values, the values we share with Taiwan and Japan and others, those are the things that allow you to, quote, take resources, not the kind of, again, Faustian grab that we've seen through history. That's my view, but I put it out there. What kind of a resource taking endeavor would you have in mind?
Well, I mean, to be honest, let's just start with Mexico. Why, we go build cars there and everything, but why is their economy so terrible? Why are the poor people in Mexico still trying to immigrate to the United States? Why, after 80 years, have we not gone in there and did what we did Japan and Germany? I mean, after the World War II, we rebuilt the economies of our enemies. But why haven't we rebuilt the economies of the countries right next to us? Why is Mexico not as rich and successful as we are. I mean, it used to be essentially part of the United States until 1920 when there was a revolution. And yet we were at the end of World War I and we didn't go there and help save Mexico. So the United States is sort of, China's taking advantage of our weakness in not wanting to go in, build economies, build a middle class, educate those people and make them essentially like us and be able to trade at the level we're trading. We believe that, there should be self-determination and countries should be able to do it on their own. But guess what? Rich people, if you don't have controls over them, right, they will exploit the weak. And that's one thing China isn't really doing. I mean, it doesn't, when you're there, you realize they've agreed that there's a level of wealth that people can have. And maybe it's limited, but it's on a meritocracy level. The smartest and the brightest get to a certain level and it keeps them happy. We don't do that here, and we're not certainly allowing that in other parts of the world. So I feel like if we really want to influence with our culture, we have to also give equal opportunity through investing in educating the world better about how to build their societies. I mean, I think that's the problem.
Okay.
I'm
General Spalding, you.
just a moment.
Oh, Tamara's going to kick us off the air. What?
Yeah, we have exactly 3 minutes, so I just want to interject that. So any next comments? Let's keep them compact and insightful.
I want to say, Darius, I love you. That's exactly the message that we want to have. And the national security strategy was, designed to be 3 parts: protect, rebuild, inspire. Protect, recognize that China's influencing on both our domestic and international institutions in a negative way, and work to counter that, and even get them out if need be. Rebuild. We haven't invested in not just in America, but any free society as much as we've invested in China over the last 30 years. So invest in infrastructure, manufacturing, science and technology, STEM education. We were investing, 2% R&D or 2% of GDP on R&D during the Cold War, now less than 0.7. And most of that research goes to China. And finally, inspire. We did the Marshall Plan. We rebuilt Japan. We rebuilt Korea. And then we stopped. We stopped because, we thought it was the end of history at the end of the Cold War. No, we needed to continue. And we didn't. And it's far more important that we share our economic capability with the world than we share our military, which is what we've been doing for the last 30 years. So investing in ourselves is where it starts, though, because we need a supply chain that enables us to go out in the world and really be that engine for economic growth that the rest of the world needs. And then right alongside that, we can rebuild institutions. When we do that, instead of the countries of Africa and Latin America looking to China's model, they're going to look to ours. That's where the inspiration comes from. And then we can start to encourage our institutions towards freedom of speech, freedom of religion, civil liberties, human rights, things that we wanted to promote. We did that effectively during the Cold War, and we just stopped. So 100% agree with everything you're saying.
TJ, it's very unusual to have 2 Americans agree on any conversation today, but these guys do. TJ and Thomas as well. Taiwan's doing that. I know for a fact, having worked with ITRI, and we have the Intelligent Community Forum organization over there, that Taiwan is taking all of the things that these 2 guys just talked about to places like Vietnam and Thailand and other countries, and are exporting all of the wisdom from that industrial ecosystem you have, as well as the values that we all share. Do you have anything to add to
one more time? Hello? Interrupting.
Yes, Tamara.
We are at 1:15, which means our program is technically over. So most of our audience is also already left because we're over time. So I welcome TJ and Thomas to give 1-minute answers, and then we are shutting down. So thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Sister Mary Pauline. She's like the nun I had in school. She always kept me regulated. Thanks, Tamara.
Yes.
TJ, go ahead, Thomas. You want to go first on that?
No. I think Dr. Liang is more suitable than me to answer this question.
Dr. Liang? Okay.
Okay, I think I'll try to make it short. Okay, I think the most important thing is that nothing else is make good friends in international business or any cooperation. So I would say that I try to deliver the messages that we want to make friends with everyone. And if for example, from U.S. perspective, you would like to assist Taiwan, from our practical experiences is the export control for some key components is the main issues. Okay, if you can assist us to make it easier, that would be very great.
Very good.
Great, thanks from my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Liang. That's unfortunately going to have to be the last word. Just one quick headline from Epoch Times. 80% of people in Hong Kong want to emigrate, and the number of multimillionaires has plunged 15%, according to a new survey. Hong Kong saw a net outflow of a significant number of people of wealth. So maybe the system doesn't work as well as we think it does, but something to consider when we talk about the structure of our societies. Gentlemen, thank you again for staying into overtime. And, we hope to be able to do this again. Joe Fargnoli, thank you as always for being my partner in this endeavor. Tamara Bond-Williams for being the conductor of this orchestra, and Matt Owen for making sure that we stay streamed. This will be shown again as a podcast if you want to listen to it again. But again, on behalf of Space and Satellite Professionals International, the New York Space Alliance, the Luxembourg Trade and Investment Office here in New York, and our media partner, SpaceNews and Jason Rainbow. Thank you again, everybody. And when you get out there, remember, let's make it a better satellite world. Over to you, Tamara. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks you all.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you so much. And the time is going to click off in 3, 2, 1.
Thanks, guys.